Sarah Martinez stood at the kitchen counter of her small apartment, staring at the empty coffee pot with tired eyes. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the cramped living room where toys were scattered everywhere. Her 4-year-old son Tommy was still sleeping in the bedroom they shared, his small body curled up under the faded blue blanket that had been his comfort since he was a baby. The alarm clock on the nightstand showed 6:30 in the morning. Sarah had exactly 1 hour before she needed to wake Tommy and get him ready for daycare. After that, she would rush to her first job at the downtown diner where she worked as a waitress. The smell of bacon and coffee from other apartments in the building made her stomach growl, reminding her that she had skipped dinner the night before to save money for Tommy's new shoes. Sarah walked quietly to the bedroom and looked down at her sleeping son. His dark hair was messy against the pillow, and his small hand clutched his favorite stuffed elephant. She thought about how much he had grown in the past year, how his questions were getting more complex, and how he needed things she could not always provide. The guilt hit her like it did every morning, heavy and familiar. She had been a single mother for 3 years now, ever since Tommy's father left when the boy was just 1 year old. David had promised to help with support payments, but those had stopped coming after the first few months. Sarah had tried calling him, but his phone number had been disconnected. She learned to stop depending on promises and started depending only on herself. The apartment was small but clean. Sarah made sure of that. The living room served as both Tommy's play area and her study space where she kept her nursing textbooks, stacked on a wobbly table. At night, after Tommy fell asleep, she would sit at that table and study by the light of a single lamp, preparing for the nursing program she had been accepted into. The classes were at night, which meant she could work during the day and still pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. Money was always tight. Sarah worked at the diner from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then picked up Tommy from daycare and brought him home. 3 evenings a week, she had classes at the community college. On those nights, Mrs. Chen from next door watched Tommy in exchange for Sarah helping her with grocery shopping on weekends. It was a system that worked, but it left Sarah exhausted most of the time. The sound of Tommy stirring in bed brought her back to the present moment. His eyes opened slowly, and he smiled when he saw his mother standing there. That smile was worth everything to Sarah. It was the reason she worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night, and sacrificed her own needs. "Good morning, baby," Sarah whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Time to get up and get ready for daycare." Tommy stretched his small arms above his head and yawned. "Mama, can we go to the park today?" Sarah's heart sank a little. She knew Tommy loved the park, but weekdays were always so busy. "Not today, sweetheart. Mama has to work, and you have to go to Miss Linda's." Miss Linda ran the daycare center where Tommy spent his days. She was kind and patient, and Tommy liked her, but Sarah could see in his eyes that he wanted more time with his mother. She wanted that too. But bills needed to be paid and food needed to be bought. As they got ready for the day, Sarah helped Tommy brush his teeth and get dressed in his favorite shirt with a picture of a dinosaur on it. She made him a simple breakfast of cereal and toast, watching as he ate with a concentration that only a 4-year-old could have. His small hand struggled a little with the spoon, but he was determined to do it himself. "Mama, why do you look so tired?" Tommy asked, looking up from his cereal bowl. Sarah caught her reflection in the small mirror across the room. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She had been working extra hours lately to save money for Tommy's birthday next month. "I'm just a little sleepy, baby. Nothing to worry about," she said, forcing a smile. She did not want Tommy to worry about grown-up problems. After breakfast, they walked to the daycare center 6 blocks away. Tommy held her hand and chatted about his dreams from the night before. Something about flying elephants and chocolate rivers. Sarah listened and responded, but part of her mind was already at the diner, thinking about the breakfast rush and the customers who would need their orders taken. The daycare center was a cheerful place with bright colors and children's artwork on the walls. Miss Linda greeted them at the door with her usual warm smile. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes who had been working with children for 20 years. "Good morning, Tommy. Are you ready for a fun day?" Miss Linda asked, taking Tommy's small backpack. Tommy nodded enthusiastically and gave his mother a tight hug. "Bye, Mama. Love you too. Baby, be good for Miss Linda." Sarah watched as Tommy ran inside to join the other children who were already playing with blocks and puzzles. She felt the familiar tug at her heart as she left him there. Every morning was the same routine, but it never got easier to walk away. The walk to the diner took 15 minutes. Sarah used this time to prepare herself mentally for the day ahead. The diner was busy, especially during breakfast and lunch hours. The customers were usually friendly, but the work was demanding. She had to be on her feet for 8 hours, carrying heavy trays, remembering orders, and keeping a smile on her face even when she felt like crying from exhaustion. The diner was called Sunny Side Up, and it had been in the same location for 30 years. The owner, Mr. Rodriguez, was a fair man who paid his employees well and treated them with respect. He knew about Sarah's situation and sometimes let her take home leftover food at the end of the day. She was grateful for his kindness, but she was also proud and did not want to seem like she was asking for charity. As Sarah tied her apron and prepared for the morning rush, she thought about the future. The nursing program would take 2 more years to complete. After that, she would be able to get a better job with better pay and more regular hours. She would be able to spend more time with Tommy and maybe even take him on a real vacation. The first customers of the day were already waiting when Sarah unlocked the front door. She put on her professional smile and greeted them warmly. The breakfast rush was about to begin, and she needed to focus on the work ahead. But in the back of her mind, she was already planning for the weekend when she would have more time to spend with Tommy. Perhaps they could go to the park then. Tommy loved to feed the ducks at the pond, and Sarah enjoyed watching him laugh and run around. Those moments of simple joy were what kept her going through the difficult days. She did not know that very soon a trip to the park would change their lives in ways she could never imagine. Saturday morning arrived with a gentle breeze and warm sunshine streaming through the apartment windows. Sarah woke up feeling different than usual. For the first time in weeks, she did not have to rush to work or worry about getting Tommy ready for daycare. The weekend stretched ahead of them like a gift. 2 whole days where she could focus completely on being Tommy's mother. Tommy was already awake, sitting up in bed and playing quietly with his stuffed elephant. When he saw his mother's eyes open, his face lit up with excitement. He had been waiting patiently for her to wake up, which showed how much he had grown and learned to be considerate. "Mama, is today the park day?" Tommy asked hopefully, his small voice filled with anticipation. Sarah smiled and pulled him close for a morning hug. His hair smelled like the gentle baby shampoo she still used on him, and his small body was warm against hers. These quiet moments together were precious to her, more valuable than any treasure she could imagine. "Yes, baby. Today we go to the park," Sarah said, feeling her own excitement build. She had been looking forward to this almost as much as Tommy had. They took their time getting ready, which was a luxury Sarah rarely enjoyed during weekdays. She made Tommy pancakes from a box mix she had been saving for a special occasion. As he ate syrup dripping down his chin, Sarah packed a small bag with water bottles, crackers, and a few of Tommy's favorite toys. The park was about 20 minutes away by bus. Sarah had chosen Riverside Park because it was free and had a playground, a pond, and plenty of open space for Tommy to run around. She had heard other mothers at the daycare talking about how nice it was, but she had never found the time to visit until now. On the bus ride, Tommy pressed his face against the window and pointed out everything he saw. Cars, dogs, other children, tall buildings, and birds flying overhead all caught his attention. Sarah watched him with deep affection, amazed by how much joy he found in simple things. His excitement was contagious, and she felt her own spirits lifting. When they arrived at the park, Sarah was impressed by how beautiful and peaceful it was. Large oak trees provided shade over winding paths, and flower beds added splashes of color throughout the grounds. The playground was modern and safe, with soft rubber surfaces and equipment designed for different age groups. Tommy ran straight to the swings, his favorite playground equipment. Sarah pushed him gently, listening to his delighted laughter as he soared back and forth. Other families were enjoying the park too, but it was not crowded or overwhelming. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly. After the swings, Tommy wanted to explore the rest of the playground. He climbed on the jungle gym with careful determination, slid down the slide multiple times, and played in the sandbox with a small shovel and bucket that another child had left behind. Sarah sat on a nearby bench, watching him closely but also allowing him the independence he needed to build confidence. As the morning progressed, Tommy's attention was drawn to something beyond the playground. He had noticed the pond in the distance, where several ducks were swimming and diving for food. His eyes grew wide with wonder as he watched the birds moving gracefully through the water. "Mama, can we go see the ducks?" Tommy asked, tugging on Sarah's hand. Sarah agreed, and they walked together along the path toward the pond. The closer they got, the more excited Tommy became. He had seen ducks in picture books, but never in real life. The pond was surrounded by benches and had a small wooden dock that extended over the water dock. As they approached, Sarah noticed an elderly man sitting alone on one of the benches. He was wearing simple clothes, a gray sweater and dark pants that it looked comfortable but not expensive. What caught her attention was the way he was interacting with the birds around him. He had a paper bag in his hands and was gently tossing small pieces of what looked like bread into the water. The ducks seemed to know him well. They swam close to where he sat, and some of the braver ones had even waddled up onto the bank nearby. Pigeons and sparrows had also gathered, forming a small circle around his bench. The man spoke to them softly, as if he was having a real conversation with each bird. Tommy was fascinated. He stopped walking and stood perfectly still, watching the scene with amazement. Sarah could see the wonder in his eyes as he observed this gentle interaction between the man and the animals. The elderly man looked up and noticed Tommy staring. Instead of being annoyed by the attention, he smiled warmly and waved. His face was kind, with wrinkles around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hair was gray and neatly combed, and his posture was straight, despite his apparent age. "Hello, there," the man said in a friendly voice. "Would you like to come closer and see the ducks?" Tommy looked up at his mother for permission. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, her protective instincts making her cautious about strangers. But something about the man's gentle manner and the peaceful way the birds trusted him made her feel that he was safe. "It's okay, Tommy, but stay close to Mama," Sarah said, taking her son's hand as they walked nearer to the bench. The man's eyes twinkled with genuine pleasure at having visitors. He appeared to be in his 70s, but he moved with surprising energy as he made room on the bench for them to sit down. His hands were clean and well cared for, and he handled the bread with gentle movements that showed respect for the creatures he was feeding. "My name is Robert," he said, extending his hand first to Sarah and then lowering it so Tommy could shake it too. "I come here every morning to visit with my feathered friends." "I'm Sarah, and this is Tommy," Sarah replied, settling onto the bench with her son between them. Tommy loves animals, but he's never seen ducks this close before. Robert's face brightened even more. "Well, Tommy, you've come to the right place. These ducks are very friendly, and they love to show off for visitors." As if on cue, one of the larger ducks performed a little dive, disappearing under the water and then popping back up with something in its beak. Tommy clapped his small hands together and giggled with delight. Robert reached into his paper bag and pulled out a small handful of what Sarah could now see was specially made bird food, not just regular bread. He explained that bread was not very healthy for ducks, but that the park sold proper duck food at a small stand near the entrance. "Would you like to help me feed them, Tommy?" Robert asked, offering some of the food to the little boy. Tommy's eyes grew even wider with excitement. He looked at his mother again, and Sarah nodded her approval. Very carefully, Robert showed Tommy how to throw the food gently into the water. Not too close to the ducks so they would not be startled, but close enough that they could easily reach it. Tommy's first attempt was clumsy, and most of the food landed on the ground instead of in the water. But Robert was patient and encouraging, showing him again how to make a gentle underhand toss. The second try was much better, and the ducks immediately swam over to eat the food Tommy had thrown. "I did it, Mama. I fed the ducks," Tommy exclaimed, his voice filled with pride and joy. Sarah felt her heart swell with happiness as she watched her son's face light up with accomplishment. This simple moment, sitting by a pond on a sunny Saturday morning, felt like the most perfect thing in the world. She realized that this was exactly what both she and Tommy had been needing without even knowing it. The following Saturday, Tommy woke up earlier than usual and ran to his mother's bedside with excitement dancing in his eyes. He had been talking about Robert and the ducks all week, asking Sarah every day if they could go back to the park. Sarah had promised they would return, and Tommy had been counting down the days like it was Christmas morning. Mama, is it park day? Can we go see Robert and feed the ducks again?" Tommy asked, bouncing on his toes beside the bed. Sarah smiled at his son's enthusiasm. The previous week's visit to the park had been such a positive experience that she found herself looking forward to it almost as much as Tommy was. There had been something peaceful and calming about sitting by the pond, watching the birds, and talking with Robert. It was the first time in months that she had felt truly relaxed. They prepared for their second trip to the park with the same care as before. Sarah packed their small bag with water and snacks, and this time she also brought a few dollars to buy proper duck food from the park stand that Robert had mentioned. Tommy wore his favorite shirt again, the one with the dinosaur, because he said it was his lucky shirt for making friends with animals. The bus ride seemed shorter this time because Tommy was so excited. He chattered constantly about all the things he wanted to show Robert and asked him about the ducks. Sarah listened with amusement, amazed by how one simple encounter had captured her son's imagination so completely. When they arrived at the park, Tommy immediately started looking around for Robert. Sarah felt a small worry that the elderly man might not be there, and she prepared herself to comfort Tommy if he was disappointed. But as they walked toward the pond, they could see a familiar figure sitting on the same bench, surrounded by his feathered friends just like before. Robert looked up and waved when he saw them approaching. His face broke into a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and Sarah could tell that he had been hoping they would return. He was wearing different clothes today, a light blue shirt and tan pants, but he still had the same gentle demeanor that had impressed them both the week before. "Tommy, Sarah, how wonderful to see you again," Robert called out as they got closer. "I was just telling the ducks that I hoped my new friends would come back to visit." Tommy ran the last few steps to the bench and immediately started examining the birds that were gathered around Robert's feet. There were more of them today, including some pigeons and a few sparrows that seemed to recognize Robert as their regular benefactor. "I brought money to buy duck food," Tommy announced proudly, holding up the small bills that Sarah had given him to carry. Robert's eyes twinkled with approval. "That's very thoughtful of you, Tommy. The ducks will be so happy that you remembered what they like to eat." While Tommy went with Sarah to buy the duck food from the park stand, Robert arranged the bread and seeds he had brought in neat piles on the bench. When they returned, he showed Tommy how to identify the different types of birds that came to visit. "See that duck with the green head? That's a male mallard. The brown one next to him is his wife, the female mallard. And those smaller birds, hopping around on the ground are sparrows," Robert explained patiently. Tommy listened with intense concentration, asking questions about everything. Why were the male and female ducks different colors? How did the birds know to come to this spot every day? Where did they sleep at night? Robert answered each question thoughtfully, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share his knowledge with such an eager student. As they fed the birds together, Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with Robert. He asked about her week, and she told him about her work at the diner and her evening classes. To her surprise, she found herself opening up about some of her challenges and worries in a way she rarely did with anyone. "It must be difficult managing everything on your own," Robert said with genuine sympathy. "You're doing an incredible job with Tommy. He's a remarkable little boy." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged how hard she was working or praised her parenting. Most of the time, she felt like she was barely keeping her head above water, constantly worried that she was not doing enough for her son. "Some days are harder than others," Sarah admitted. "I just want to give him the best life I can, you know. Sometimes I worry that he's missing out because I have to work so much." Robert looked at Tommy, who was now lying on his stomach at the edge of the pond, watching the ducks swim with complete fascination. "Look at him, Sarah. He's happy, curious, polite, and kind to animals. Those are the things that really matter. The rest will work itself out." As the morning progressed, Robert began sharing more stories about the different birds and animals in the park. He seemed to know everything about the local wildlife, from the migration patterns of certain birds to the best times of day to spot different species. Tommy hung on every word, and even Sarah found herself learning things she had never known before. When a small squirrel approached their bench, Robert explained that it was probably looking for nuts or seeds. He had brought some unsalted peanuts specifically for the squirrels, and he showed Tommy how to hold very still while offering food to the cautious little animal. The squirrel sniffed at Tommy's outstretched hand for several long moments before finally taking a peanut and scampering away to enjoy its treat. Tommy was absolutely thrilled by this close encounter, and he talked about it excitedly for the next 20 minutes. "Robert, how do you know so much about animals?" Tommy asked during a quiet moment when they were watching the ducks glide across the pond. Robert was quiet for a moment, as if considering how to answer. "I've always loved nature, Tommy. When I was young, I spent a lot of time outdoors and I learned to pay attention to the world around me. Animals can teach us many important things if we watch them carefully." Sarah noticed that Robert rarely talked about his own life or background. He seemed more interested in listening to others and asking questions about their experiences. She found his humility refreshing, especially compared to some of the customers at the diner, who loved to talk about themselves constantly. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and more families began arriving at the park, Robert started gathering up his empty food bags and preparing to leave. Tommy immediately looked disappointed, not wanting their time together to end. "Will you be here next Saturday?" Tommy asked hopefully. Robert smiled and ruffled Tommy's hair gently. "I'm here most mornings. Tommy, if you and your mother would like to visit again, I would be very happy to see you." Sarah found herself speaking before she had fully thought about it. "We'll be here. Tommy loves this, and honestly, so do I. It's nice to have a peaceful place to come to." As they prepared to part ways, Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out a small book about birds and wildlife. It was clearly well used but in good condition, with colorful pictures and simple explanations that would be perfect for a curious 4-year-old. "This is for you, Tommy," Robert said, handing over the book, "so you can learn about birds even when we're not at the park together." Tommy accepted the gift with wide eyes and immediately started flipping through the pages. Sarah felt touched by Robert's thoughtfulness, but also slightly uncomfortable accepting gifts from someone who was still essentially a stranger. "Robert, you don't need to give us things," Sarah said softly. "You're already being so kind with your time." Robert waved away her concerns with a gentle gesture. "It's just a book, Sarah. I enjoyed sharing it with someone who appreciates it. Besides, good books should be passed along to the next generation." As they walked back toward the bus stop, Tommy clutched his new book tightly and chatted about all the birds he was going to learn about. Sarah found herself thinking about Robert and wondering what his story was. There was something about him that suggested depth and experience, but he remained mysteriously private about his own life. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah and Tommy started their regular Saturday visits to the park. What had begun as a simple trip to feed ducks had become the highlight of both their weeks. Tommy would start talking about Robert and the birds every Monday morning, and Sarah found herself looking forward to the peaceful conversations and gentle wisdom that Robert shared with them on this particular Saturday. Something felt different from the moment they arrived at the park. Sarah noticed it first when they were still walking along the main path toward the pond. There were more people than usual, and some of them were dressed in business suits rather than casual park clothes. Near the pond, she could see what looked like a small group of serious-looking men standing around, talking quietly among themselves. Tommy was oblivious to anything unusual. He was focused entirely on reaching their usual spot by the water where Robert would be waiting with his daily supply of bird food. As they got closer, Sarah could see Robert sitting on his familiar bench, but today he was not alone. 2 men in dark suits were standing near him, speaking in low voices while Robert listened with a patient expression on his face. "Mama, why are those men talking to Robert?" Tommy asked, tugging on Sarah's hand as they approached. Sarah was wondering the same thing. Her protective instincts kicked in, and she slowed their pace while trying to figure out what was happening. The men did not look threatening, but they definitely seemed out of place in the peaceful park setting. As they got closer, Sarah could hear bits of the conversation. One of the men was saying something about a meeting on Monday morning, and another mentioned something about board members and quarterly reports. These were not the kinds of words she expected to hear during a casual conversation at a duck pond. Robert noticed Sarah and Tommy approaching and held up his hand to the men he was speaking with. "Gentlemen, could you give me a few minutes? To have some special friends I need to greet." The men nodded respectfully and stepped away, though Sarah noticed they did not leave the area entirely. They moved to a nearby bench where they continued their quiet discussion while keeping a respectful distance. "Good morning, Tommy." "Good morning, Sarah," Robert called out with his usual warm smile, though Sarah thought she detected something different in his manner today. He seemed a bit more formal, perhaps a little distracted. Tommy ran to his usual spot and immediately began looking for the birds. Several ducks were already swimming near the shore, as if they knew their regular feeding time was approaching. Robert reached for his paper bag of bird food, but Sarah noticed that today he also had what looked like a leather briefcase sitting beside him on the bench. "Robert, is everything okay?" Sarah asked carefully, glancing toward the men in suits. "Those men seem to be discussing business with you." Robert followed her gaze and then looked back at her with a thoughtful expression. For a moment, he seemed to be considering something carefully. Then he sighed gently and gestured for Sarah to sit down next to him while Tommy began his ritual of greeting the ducks. "Sarah, I've been meaning to talk with you about something," Robert began slowly. "Over these past few weeks I've come to value our friendship very much. Both you and Tommy have brought joy to my mornings in a way I hadn't expected." Sarah felt a flutter of worry in her stomach. The tone of Robert's voice suggested that he was about to share something significant, and she was not sure she was ready for any major changes in their comfortable routine. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am," Robert continued, his eyes focused on Tommy, who was now carefully distributing duck food into the water. "Not dishonest exactly, but I haven't shared the complete picture of my life." Before Sarah could respond, one of the suited men approached them again, this time looking apologetic for the interruption. "Excuse me, Mr. Brennan, but we really do need to discuss the Henderson acquisition before your Monday meeting with the board." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Mr. Brennan, board, meetings, acquisitions. These were terms from a world completely different from feeding ducks. In a public park, she looked at Robert with new eyes, suddenly seeing things she had missed before. "Thank you, James. I'll be with you in just a moment," Robert replied to the man, who nodded and returned to his colleagues. Tommy, who had been only half listening to the adult conversation, suddenly looked up with curiosity. "Robert, why did that man call you Mr. Brennan? I thought your name was just Robert." Robert smiled at Tommy's innocent question. "Well, Tommy, Robert is my first name. Brennan is my last name, so my full name is Robert Brennan, just like your full name is Tommy Martinez." Sarah's mind was racing. The name Robert Brennan sounded familiar, though she could not immediately place where she had heard it before. She was sure it was connected to something important, something she should recognize. "Sarah," Robert said gently, turning to face her directly, "I can see that you're trying to figure out why that name sounds familiar. Robert Brennan is the name of someone who used to run a large technology company. That someone is me." The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. Robert Brennan. She had seen that name in newspapers and magazines, usually connected with stories about successful businesses and charitable donations. He was not just wealthy, he was incredibly wealthy, one of those people whose names appeared on lists of the richest individuals in the country. "You're that Robert Brennan," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one who built Brennan Technologies." Robert nodded slowly. "I founded the company 30 years ago, and I ran it until I retired 2 years ago." "Yes, I'm that Robert Brennan." Sarah felt overwhelmed by this revelation. For weeks, she had been sitting beside one of the most successful businessmen in the world, sharing her struggles about paying bills and working double shifts. She felt embarrassed by how much she had complained about her financial problems too, someone who probably spent more on lunch than she made in a month. "Why didn't you tell us?" Sarah asked, though her tone was more curious than accusatory. Robert was quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy, who was now trying to coax a particularly shy duck to come closer to the shore. "Because this is the first time in years that someone has talked to me just as Robert, not as the CEO or the billionaire or the guy who can solve everyone's problems with money. You and Tommy became my friends without knowing anything about my wealth or my business success. That's incredibly rare and precious." Sarah began to understand. She thought about how differently she might have acted if she had known from the beginning who Robert really was. Would she have been comfortable sharing her worries about money? Would Tommy have been as natural and playful around him? Probably not. When my wife passed away 2 years ago, I realized that most of the people in my life were there because of my position or my money, Robert continued. I started coming to this park because it was the one place where I could just be a regular person feeding birds. Then you and Tommy showed up, and for the first time in a very long time, I remembered what it felt like to have genuine human connections. Tommy had finished feeding the ducks and was now examining his bird book, trying to identify a small brown bird that had landed near their feet. He was completely absorbed in his task, unaware that the adults were discussing anything more serious than weekend plans. I need to ask you something important, Sarah, Robert said, his voice becoming more serious. Now that you know who I really am, I hope it won't change our friendship. I hope you'll still bring Tommy here on Saturdays, and we can continue to enjoy these mornings together. Sarah looked at this man who had shown such kindness to her son and such genuine interest in their lives. Wealthy or not, he was still the same person who had patiently taught Tommy about birds, who had listened to her worries without judgment, and who had made their Saturdays something to look forward to. Robert Sarah said firmly, "You're still the same person who sits here every morning talking to ducks and making my son laugh. That's what matters to me." 2 weeks after learning about Robert's true identity, Sarah found herself sitting in a coffee shop near the community college where she attended her nursing classes. She stared at the envelope in her hands, reading the return address for the 10th time, the Brennan Foundation. Inside was a letter that would change everything for her and Tommy. Robert had kept his promise about not letting his wealth change their friendship. They continued to meet at the park every Saturday, and he remained the same gentle, patient man who had first captured Tommy's heart by feeding birds. But something else had happened during their conversations over those 2 weeks. Robert had quietly learned more about Sarah's struggles and dreams, and he had been thinking about ways he could help without making her feel uncomfortable. The letter in Sarah's hands was formal but warm. It explained that the Brennan Foundation provided educational scholarships to deserving students who showed determination and promise. Sarah had been selected to receive a full scholarship that would cover the remaining costs of her nursing program, including books, uniforms, and even some living expenses. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she read the letter again. She had never applied for this scholarship. In fact, she had never heard of it before. But somehow, she knew that Robert was behind this opportunity, even though the letter made no direct mention of their friendship. That evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep, Sarah called the number listed in the letter. A kind woman answered, and explained that Sarah had been nominated by someone who preferred to remain anonymous. The scholarship was real, legitimate, and would begin immediately if Sarah chose to accept it. "But I didn't apply for anything," Sarah said, still confused by the whole situation. "Sometimes our benefactors identify worthy candidates through their own research and community connections," the woman explained patiently. "The foundation believes in supporting people who are working hard to build better lives for themselves and their families." Sarah knew she should accept this gift gracefully, but part of her felt uncertain about taking what felt like charity. She had been independent for so long, working hard for everything she and Tommy had. The idea of accepting help, even from someone who had become a dear friend, made her feel vulnerable and proud at the same time. The next Saturday at the park, Sarah decided to address the scholarship directly with Robert. Tommy was playing with a new toy boat that Robert had brought for him to float in the shallow part of the pond. Giving the adults a chance to talk privately. "Robert, I received a very interesting letter this week." Sarah began, carefully watching his face for any sign of acknowledgement. Robert continued throwing small pieces of food to the ducks, but Sarah noticed a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, what kind of letter?" "A scholarship letter. From your foundation. For nursing school." Sarah kept her voice gentle but direct. Robert finally looked at her, his eyes warm but serious. "And what do you think about that?" Sarah had been preparing for this conversation all week, but now that the moment had arrived, she found it difficult to express her complicated feelings. "I think it's incredibly generous. I also think it's overwhelming, and I'm not sure I should accept it." "Why not?" Robert asked simply. Sarah struggled to put her emotions into words. "Because I've been taking care of myself and Tommy for 3 years. Because I don't want to feel like I owe someone something. Because I'm scared of depending on help that might not always be there." Robert nodded thoughtfully, as if he had expected this response. "Sarah, let me tell you something about wealth and what I've learned over the years. Money is only valuable when it does something meaningful. For most of my life, I made money to make more money. It became a game, a way of keeping score." He paused to watch Tommy, who was delightedly sailing his little boat from one side of the pond to the other. "When my wife died, I realized that all that money meant nothing if it couldn't buy me more time with the person I loved most. That's when I started thinking differently about what wealth should do." Sarah listened intently as Robert continued. "This scholarship isn't charity, Sarah. It's an investment. I've watched you for weeks, and I see someone who will make an excellent nurse. You'll help people, save lives, make a difference in the world. When I help you achieve that goal, I'm not just giving you money. I'm helping to create something valuable that will benefit many people." "But what if I fail?" Sarah asked quietly. What if I can't handle the program or I don't become the nurse you think I can be? Robert smiled gently. Then you'll have tried your best, and Tommy will have seen his mother pursuing her dreams with courage and determination. That alone is worth any investment. As they continued talking, Sarah began to understand that Robert's offer came from a place of genuine friendship and respect, not pity or obligation. He saw potential in her that she sometimes doubted in herself, and he wanted to help her achieve goals that would benefit not just her family, but the broader community as well. Over the following months, Sarah's life changed in ways she had never imagined possible. The scholarship removed the financial pressure that had been weighing on her shoulders for years. She was able to reduce her hours at the diner and focus more energy on her studies. Her grades improved dramatically, and she found herself genuinely excited about her future career in nursing. Tommy thrived as well. With less financial stress in their household, Sarah was more relaxed and present when they spent time together. She was able to take him on small adventures around the city, visit museums, and even plan a weekend trip to the beach. More importantly, Tommy continued to learn from Robert, who had become like a grandfather figure in his life. Robert introduced Tommy to books about science and nature, taught him how to be respectful and curious about the world around him, and modeled the kind of quiet dignity and kindness that Sarah hoped her son would carry with him throughout his life. The relationship benefited Robert as well, giving him a sense of purpose and family connection that he had been missing since his wife's death. As Sarah progressed through her nursing program, she and Robert often talked about her future plans. She wanted to work in pediatric nursing, helping children who were facing medical challenges. Robert listened to her goals with the same attention he gave to Tommy's stories about school and friends. One evening, as Sarah was studying for a particularly difficult exam, she received a phone call from Robert. This was unusual, as they typically only spoke during their Saturday park visits. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting your studies," Robert said, "but I wanted to share some news with you. The hospital where you'll be doing your clinical rotations has an opening for a pediatric nursing position. It's a good position with excellent benefits, and they're looking for someone who shows promise and dedication." Sarah felt her heart race with excitement. She was still months away from graduation, but the idea that there might be a job waiting for her was almost too good to believe. "Robert, how do you know about this position?" she asked. "The hospital administrator is a friend of mine. When she mentioned they were looking for exceptional candidates, I thought of you. But Sarah, this is not about my influence. If you want this job, you'll need to earn it through your own skills and qualifications." 6 months later, Sarah graduated from nursing school with honors. Tommy sat in the audience with Robert, both of them beaming with pride as Sarah received her degree. She had not only completed the program successfully, but she had also been offered the pediatric nursing position at the hospital. As they celebrated afterward, Robert pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. You've shown that my faith in you was completely justified." Sarah looked at this man who had changed her life in so many ways. "Robert, I don't think I can ever adequately thank you for everything you've done for us." Robert shook his head gently. "Sarah, you've given me something far more valuable than anything I could give you. You've given me friendship, purpose, and the joy of watching Tommy grow. You've reminded me what truly matters in life." Years later, when Tommy was older and understood more about the unusual circumstances of their friendship with Robert, he would ask his mother what she had learned from their experience. Sarah would tell him that she learned that genuine kindness knows no boundaries, that true wealth is measured in relationships and positive impact, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people come into our lives disguised as ordinary strangers feeding birds in a park.